uh, like I said, accessory. You can do accessories and accessory buildings, and then hopefully convert. So,
Okay.
I since I'm in a one-room hotel room, my wife's trying to sleep. I should probably just listen and not talk so much.
Okay. Well, Richard, what about you? Got if this is the Richard I'm thinking of, you've got a good piece of land. I know two other Richards. And we know that your land is pretty much at your disposal. Hi, Jimmy.
Hey, how are you?
Doing good, doing good. Trying to overcome all these technical difficulties.
I had a slight snafu. I had a reminder set on my phone, but I got off work early and took my phone in to plug it in one room. And then we sat down and watched Harry Potter. And I just looked up about 10 minutes ago. I was like, holy smokes, and had to run and grab my laptop and jump on. So sorry I'm late.
No problem at all, because nothing's been able. YouTube was working last week, and then suddenly they wanted an encoder, and all my options disappeared. So, the joys of technology. I guess I was update last week, but not up to date this week.
Never ending cycle.
Oh yeah. So, what about you, Jimmy? What do you have going on in your world? Looking for land, looking for options, or already have land?
Have land. I'm looking. Right now, we live in a house that's about 110-year-old plantation style wraparound porch, 2-story, full basement, all that good jazz. Which in a lot of ways is really cool. It's been in the family for several years. I mean, it's not like a generational thing. We moved in here when I was a junior in high school, and I'm in my mid 40s now. Went off to college, and then me and my family just moved in about 8 years ago. But of course, a house that age, there's lots of charm, but there's also lots of upkeep, and it's anything but efficient. So we've been wanting to do like a little efficient homestead. I'm in Oklahoma. Utilities are cheap, so I'm not dead set on being off grid. I like that idea. Kind of as a on the thrive end of your survive and thrive. I can certainly survive where I'm at. Don't know anything on the house other than upkeep and stuff. I have 45 acres, but we're looking at possibilities of maybe selling the house and 5 acres here with it, and then buying some land in a different area. I can barely get high-speed internet here. I work in IT, so I have the slowest DSL internet that AT&T offers, and it's kind of spotty. If it rains, then I'm in a world of hurt. So we're looking to maybe move someplace else, but this is just the first webinar I've been able to hop on, and so I just signed up for the program last week and was wanting to jump in and say howdy and see what everybody else has got going.
Well, I'm glad you're able to join us. I kind of was going to let everybody direct the discussion here. In some of my other webinars, I've kind of had a program to follow, but everything's just kind of open. Oklahoma, they're you pretty much build what you want to out there, right?
Yeah, I'm out in rural area, so I'm just outside of Tulsa. I work in the Tulsa area, but I'm just on the outskirts of Tulsa, rural area. And before my dad sold the property off, the house set in the middle of 720 acres, and I've got 5 acres here, and then I've got 40 acres about a mile away. But my house sits a mile and a half outside of Tulsa city limits. But if you just dropped in at my house, you would think you were way out.
Wow.
So,
well, it sounds like we have a situation here where internet, it is important. All of these things we have to consider, and internet, where I am, I don't have anything available. They won't even bring DSL in, even though we're 10 minutes from downtown, and the 10 megabit internet stops a mile down the road. So,
yeah. Well, and one thing, and I saw this on another channel, homestead channel that I follow. There's 4gantennashop.com or .org. I forget now what it is, but it's and it's actually something I'm looking into. You can buy the modem for, I think it's like $150. You buy it, but then as long as you're within 5 or 6 miles of a cell tower, this modem, the provider behind it or whatever, basically buys the excess bandwidth from the cell towers. So you're getting unlimited, broadband that way. And it's supposed to be 12 to 20 meg on the low end, maybe as high as 35 meg. And I've got 4 meg here at the house right now. So any of that is faster than what I have. And they have some higher packages where you can buy priority data to get the faster for certain amounts of stuff. But so that I just found out about that about 2 weeks ago. So like that kind of broadens my search because there's cell towers everywhere nowadays.
right. No, that sounds like it has some potential. And so, considering land, if internet's something you need, it's definitely important. And then, of course, if you go in towards town, then you got the issues with permitting, which, if you're looking at building out of AIrChrete, then that can be quite a challenge depending on your inspectors or what you're willing to do.
Right. Yeah. I know that the first thing, once my son was ready to start building forms last week. I got a son that's he'll be a junior in high school, but 16, about to turn 17. And, of course, Oklahoma, Tornado Alley, and one of the things I was most interested in, I was like, well, hey, that would make a fantastic storm shelter / plus if you're building it as a storm shelter or root cellar or whatever, then, so we have good living accommodations now. So, I'm looking for, kind of building for down the road, that type of stuff. I'm not, I want to work my way out of the job market in about 5 to 7 years is my time frame that I'm looking at. But he's like, hey, we could, build that storm shelter, and we have a basement under the house. And I try not to, my wife takes comfort in knowing we have a basement. And I'm like, I try not to tell her, hey, I don't know that I'd want to be in the basement if a storm comes this way, because the whole house is going to come down on top of you. But, if we, built us an AIrChrete dome just to act as a storm shelter, if nothing else, plus that's also a test run, then, hey, great, let's build us a 10-foot diameter dome, for practice and for, like anything, you get better with repetition and work the kinks out and have a trial run on a small project that's, we can take in over a few evenings during the week and then a couple weekends, with the learning curve and everything. And then have more confidence and more proficiency when we decide to tackle something a little bigger.
Right. That's an absolutely great plan. In fact, that's where I try to encourage a lot of people to start because, sometimes having never built anything, they want to build a 60-foot dome. And, it's better to start small and get familiar with the process and commit your mistakes on something where it's easy to fix and just doesn't even matter. And,
right.
One
of your one of your videos you had posted, you were just showing some 3D idea things, like, and it was something like you had several little domes, several smaller domes lined up with like a potential greenhouse or an arch connecting it all together. And that's the one that my kids just, oh, hey, that's what we need to do. But there's a channel, My Little Homestead. I think they're like in New Mexico or Arizona, and they do earth bag houses. Yeah, I live along a creek. I just had 18 inches of water in my basement a month ago, from record floods we had here.
Yeah.
So, earth bags would not be a good idea for me here. And that's part of why we're looking to move now. But they have wanted to do the little individual buildings per kid, for several years. We're talking about building tiny houses for them. We've been talking about that for a couple of years. When they get out of high school, build them tiny houses that they can live in while they're going to college or trade school or whatever their path takes them.
Oh, absolutely. And so you own land now, and will this be the first purchase of land that you will be ever making, or is this nothing new to you?
For me personally, this will be my first purchase, and I go to church with a number of real estate agents, but right now, so the flood is kind of what spurred us on. We were planning to build out our homestead here, and there is some sentimental attachment to the house, but not, it's not like it's been in the family for generations. We bought it when I was in junior high, completely gutted it, redid it. But my parents bought a lot of property. We had 23 rent houses and some apartment complexes. Dad bought a lot of stuff out of foreclosure when I was growing up. And so I've been around the transactions, but this will be my first purchase. The land that I have now with stuff, when I got married, my dad gave me a house in 10 acres. And then he traded me when my mother passed away 13, 14 years ago. When Dad remarried 7 or 8 years ago, he moved to a new house with his new wife, and then traded me my smaller house in 10 acres for this larger house and 5 acres. And so I've done family land swaps basically, but I've never purchased on my own to this point. And then my 40 acres was inherited from my grandparents.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess, it sounds like you have good people around you, people involved in real estate that can keep you from making the mistakes. And I'll just mention for anyone else who might watch this or listen to this later, one of the biggest things is probably it's best to avoid buying land unseen over the internet and giving money just out of the blue, as opposed to going through a title company, making sure that you have an insurance policy on the purchase and that the land is actually free and clear. And, sometimes you can find really great deals on land only to find out that there's not an actual right of way, or, it can be landlocked. Sometimes tax sales or sheriff sales, you can pick up land very cheaply. A lot of the courthouses will post that where you can get access to it. But even that land, there's no guarantee that there's access to the land. And, those are kind of the big points. I've met a few people who bought land sight unseen, only to find out that 5 or 6 other people had also bought the same land. But that's, really the biggest thing I think for most people is, going through the title company, because they do all the work, and they are basically just giving you an insurance policy for the purchase of that land. And it's not something you really want to skimp on in that area. Now, I will say this too, there is a lot of private land out there that's you can get private financing on. And there's a few people who will give you financing who just, they're kind of like personal investment bankers, but they're their own bank, and so there are people also looking to loan money outside of the normal financial institutions. We find those occasionally, and these are all great options for buying land if you can't purchase land outright. But I know in Oklahoma there's quite a bit of unimproved land, and sometimes those are really your best price points, because whenever you buy land with improvements, you're going to be paying somebody's ideal amount, or whatever the tax assessor appraiser can push it up to. And that kind of thing tends to set you back a little bit over, just buying a plain unimproved piece of land.
Yeah, my wife had found, or she thought she had found, several really nice deals. One of the larger suburbs of Tulsa. My wife jokes that we live there and sleep out here in the boonies. But she was driving through town one day last week and found this great place for sale. It had an older 40s or 50s ranch style house in town, like a quarter mile from a large 5-lane intersection. And she said, it has some land with it. We need to call on this. And I said, honey, do you want to guess how many numbers are in the price? Not what the numbers are, but just how many places. And she's like, oh, it's an older house. It's no big deal. So it was 17 acres, in a prime area, basically surrounded by housing additions. And they're trying to sell it to a developer for, I think it was 1.75 million. Or no, I'm sorry, it's 2.75 million. They were asking for 17 or 19 acres in, in a prime area. It could be zoned commercial, or it's currently residential and ag, but it's in the middle of town. So she's like, she was kind of shocked with the price point on that. But yeah, we're looking for unimproved out and about and around. We've got right now we have a small back Eden garden. I just got some IBC totes, and I'm wanting to start working on getting my first aquaponics system up and running. This summer and fall. And I've studied aquaponics for quite a while. I'm in a co-op group that sells as like a CSA, where you can buy organic produce through that. But I'm wanting to get into the producing side rather than just the consuming side.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very worthwhile hobby. Richard here, he owns the East Texas Aquaponics. They're the largest aquaponics operation anywhere around Dallas, and he might be a good person to get in contact with. And I've been doing aquaponics since before it had a name, and yeah, so it's worth doing. Honestly, at this point, I would love to do everything in a greenhouse in aquaponics. I noticed that some of the systems mature over time and begin to be able to produce things like corn, something that's not possible in a fresh system.
Right.
But yeah, on the land, it's really important to look at where the land is. John here was asking about doing soil tests. If you're in an area and you're going to put in a septic system, you got to make sure that land will percolate properly. And if you look into the area, it's also nice to see if it's in a floodplain. Even though floodplains are very fertile, we have some land around Houston, Texas, where all the old farmhouses understood what the floodplain was, and all their houses were built on stilts just above that level. And so when the flooding occurred, those houses were fine, but all of the new houses had water up to the windows. And that's another thing to really keep an eye out for, because sometimes you get great, beautiful, fertile looking land, but to go and throw a house in it, kind of like you were saying, near a creek, and then suddenly you have water in your basement. Those are things that you can also use as a bargaining chip. If you're willing to take responsibility and be careful and design appropriately for the area, you can do that. But it's also a bargaining chip in the case. A lot of people, if you point out the fact that, oh, this is in a floodplain, it's not actually suitable for, quote, residential use, then sometimes you can really negotiate the price downwards or make a bid. And if you have a lawyer friend or something, it can be very useful to just put offers down on property with the stipulation that if your lawyer advises you against it or something to that effect, that you have the right to cancel the contract. And that allows you to throw bids out there that are much lower than market value. And sometimes people will take you up on it, but then, sometimes you didn't necessarily want it or you found a better offer. And that's why if you have a lawyer friend or a, quote, financial advisor, then you can use that as an out to make offers, because sometimes you can get a really good deal just by making offers.
Yeah, my dad was he had a suit job. He was had a suit job during the Vietnam War and was well paid doing that. And then they closed a plant down in Tulsa after the war, and he went to move on, but I forget exactly how he ended up there. But he ended up working at the post office. And so he knew, of course, he'd grown up in this town. He knew everybody around anyway. But then when he's running the mail route, he was a rural carrier. So he knew anytime Farmer Jones wanted to sell the back 40 or, anytime somebody wanted to get rid of property. And that's when he kind of amassed his, he had like 3,200 acres at one point, I believe. But he would make offers. He'd be like, hey, I know you're asking X amount, but I'm not interested in it at that price, but here's a much lower offer than you're asking, and just file this away. I wish you the best. If you can get your asking price, fantastic. If you don't get there at some point, then, my lower offer still stands. And, and it was all individual stuff. It wasn't, this was back in the handshake days. So, he would just go by and say, hey, I'll offer you way less than you're asking, and everybody knew he wasn't insulting anybody or anything else, but he was in no hurry. And then if they called him back in 6 months or a year, well, yeah, I'll still take it at that lower price.
Right. And that's a good point. Your dad, being part of the community, was aware of that, and they were aware of him. And whenever you're looking for land, you can go into areas and try to find the coffee shop where all the old timers just hang out and visit and get out of the house and get to know them a little bit and talk to them and ask questions and ask them about land for sale. And sometimes they're a little bit reserved toward new people, but if you have coffee with them a few times, often they know people that are thinking about selling land often before it even goes on the market. And those are great opportunities to make offers as well, because sometimes people just want to move on, get out from under it, or someone's passed away and the kids just want to cash out and go back to town. And so that's a nice little trick if you can find some of the locals and even ask around some of your farmer type people, because they'll know where to go to meet similar people. And it's just little tricks like that can save you a big fortune. John was also asking about taking water out of a creek or a stream, and he was asking if the EPA would give him grief. And that's entirely possible. I think every state, I know Texas even passed a law that basically says that the state owns the water rights completely, like you have none. And so, yeah, it's possible that you could get grief technically, not necessarily from the EPA as much as a county or state entity. If, for example, you had a creek and you dammed it up, that can be a real legal nightmare for other people that might be using the water downstream. So you do have to be careful and alert to what the laws are, and obviously a lot of times it's don't ask, don't tell on a lot of that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's you got to look into what you're doing. And if you're getting on a creek and you want to siphon some water off, it's rare that that's a problem. But if you're in a dry area or an area where somebody has nothing better to do than call the local enforcement people, then it can be an issue.
Yeah, where I'm at here, like I said, we used to have a lot of land here. This was in the middle of a 6,000 tree pecan orchard, and in Oklahoma's a water rights state where we had to file for water rights, and we had to track. We were getting it for agricultural irrigation, and we had to track how many gallons, and how many gallons per hour the pump, would handle, how often we were pumping, that type of stuff. And then, we were awarded water rights, for I think it's a 5-year period with renewals available. But for an individual, if he's trying to, just if I was just going to have a homestead here and siphon some water off, I had looked at, like, we have a pond that is just off the creek bank, just inside the creek, and we had looked at digging it out and burying a pipe, down below the normal water level to let water in, and then building the creek bank back up so that I would have water running in here, but I wouldn't be pulling it directly out of the creek, or something to let the water seep in easier, so that when if the Corps or whoever, I don't know who regulates the creeks, but the creek that I'm on downstream, the Tulsa water treatment plant is downstream from me, so they keep the water flowing through here because Tulsa and several other communities use this creek to for their water treatment plants. And so there's always plenty of water coming through here. But if I could have it bleed into a pond, so technically I wouldn't be pulling out of the creek, it's but that was, we had a dirt pit on the place. We dug this pond, or dug a dirt pit really, sold the dirt for fill and different things, and then left a pond when we were done.
Right. And, you make a good point there. Sometimes you can get very creative and find ways to make land pay for itself, or at least assist in the payment or the taxes. I like to collect some of these unique little stories, and there's a story Bill Mollison used to tell. And he was talking about how a guy had a pond and he had lotus flowers in it, and he tried everything in the world to kill them and get rid of them, and he never could get rid of them. And then one day a lady came by and offered him $5 for a handful of lotus flowers. And from there it went to actually making so much money as to replace his job, just selling lotus seeds and flowers out of that pond. So, you can look around, and a lot of times it's limited by your ability to just be creative and pay attention to what's going on. We have some property in West Texas, and it's loaded with chaparral, and it's a medicinal herb, a little strong. Some people use it to cure cancer, and it's very expensive per ounce, and yet you could probably pay your taxes easily just selling a few pounds of dried leaves off the land.
Yeah.
You can lease land for hunting, for cattle. There's a lot of options out there. It's just about being creative. And
yeah. When we bought, when my parents bought this place, like I said, I was in junior high, but there is, good sandy loam soil on it, but it was, flood zone, it was too far from the house originally to put cattle and stuff on. Dad ran cattle in there part of the time, but he had, he always watched the creek. If it was going to get up, he'd get them out. And then I don't know who gave him the idea of doing the dirt pit, but he opened up a dirt pit and, sold dirt out of here for construction site and fill stuff. And a lot of people used it for flower beds and garden. It was good sandy loam. And then once he dug out as much as he wanted to dig out, he went and talked to one of the local construction companies, demolition companies, about doing rock and dirt fill. So when they did demolition, he didn't want to bring in rebar and stuff like that in, but when they had he said he's fine with concrete as long as there was no exposed rebar. But basically, they brought in loads of rock and dirt to fill the holes back in, and then he pushed topsoil back over the top of it. So in the end, it looks the same way it did when we bought it, except he got paid to dig a hole and paid to fill it up. And I thought, no, that's pretty creative.
Yeah, and you can even play the money game with real estate. I mean, I know it's a little cliche, but a lot of fortunes have been made in real estate. For example, there was a guy who found a piece of land that was pretty undervalued, and he made an offer on it and got it, and then he sold the timber off the land, which pretty much paid for the land, and then he had it reappraised while it was a total disaster after the lumber people or the timber people had come in, and he got it devalued even more on the market. And then he cleaned it up and made a working farm, and then he started selling produce, and he would file the income. I can't remember the form name now, but there's a form you file for making farm income on income tax. And he filed that intentionally for a couple of years, and then he took that to the bank showing that he had a working, productive farm, and he was able to then resell the farm to someone else for a substantial markup. And that money could then be rolled forward to basically do the same thing with an even larger tract of land. And he got up to where he was doing 1,000-acre plus sections of land. And he's able to back pay a few that he wanted to keep for him and his family. John was asking another question about, are there any issues related to solar? John, if you plan on selling solar power to the power company, yeah, there can be some issues with if you're in an area that has a co-op power facility, because they're pretty much a private company and they don't really have to buy your power or do anything. They can be somewhat difficult to deal with. And also on the flip side of that, there are some areas around cities where getting solar power on your roof, for example, would be forbidden. So there's definitely some things that you've got to look out for, if you're getting around a populous area, or if you're getting out into the sticks where, you have brand X power co-op. The other thing that I'm going to go ahead and lump solar in also with choosing land to grow or to put an aquaponics system in. I don't know how quickly these pictures are updating on y'all's screen, but if you buy a lot and either side of the lot has got these really tall trees on either side of your lot, and if the sun comes over the top, you've really got to buy a piece of land that you can try to get at least 8 hours of sun in. And that's important. I mean, as important as having internet in some cases. When it comes to growing, you want to choose land that you have plenty of sun on, because there's actually a number of lots around this town that seem like a great deal, but if you want to grow on them, they're just not going to work, because you've got these really old mature oak trees on either side of the property, and that means you're in the shade all day long. So that's one thing to look out for. If growing your own food, doing aquaponics, or growing in the dirt is important, then part of your land needs are going to include the sunshine, or buying enough land that you can actually clear it out and get that sun down to your system. So I see we've got Al in here on the phone line.
Hey, buddy. How you doing?
Doing good, Al. Anything you want to add to this?
But I'm not trying to be smart. There's a whole bunch I can add, and that's why I encourage you to come to the workshop, because everything you said is true. I got theories on certain amount of trees, a bit of shade. Our conversations on growing in filtered sunlight, and certain plants respond better to it than others, and climates. What I would say is you hit the nail right on the head as far as the property being sustainable. And if you're looking for just solar power to carry you through too, so many people get hung up on solar, where the state I'm in, Arkansas, I see these people. I'm right by a power supply, and I've learned how to have about a $25 a month light bill max. And if I was going to go solar, like especially this last year, I'm not so sure that I'd want to go just solar, because there's so much wind up here, man. And these new low-speed turbines, there's a place by me, Missouri Wind and Solar. Now, this is 2-year-old information, so maybe the price has gone up a little, but a guy could go in there and literally leave for $800 with everything he needed except the battery bank. You know, and we get a lot of wind at night turning, and when everybody gets looking at that sun, when I got into solar in Florida, what's kept me there for so long was the sun. I've connected with Larry Wexler, who built an electric car. It's got panels on it, way ahead of his time. But the truth is, the sun doesn't shine all the time, and boy, that wind does blow. And if I was going to do solar, I would have to have wind too. The other thing that we discussed about trees, I lived in the state, Michigan, when I was growing up, when I was a kid, that if you didn't have a layer of pine thicket down the north side of your driveway, you weren't going nowhere in the wintertime until you run the tractor down the driveway. So,
Yeah,
you know
you're right. And of course, it all has to be gauged to your location. Like in the location here in Tyler, Texas, our average wind speed is under 3 miles an hour most of the year, and that makes it absolutely useless except when storms blow in. So yeah, that is a good point too. Solar doesn't always work. If you live in an area that's got a lot of cloud cover a lot of the time, it's just not going to be as productive.
Exactly.
And yeah, Richard was saying get out the chainsaw and just cut it. Yeah, and that's another issue. If you're clearing land, I cleared my land originally by hand with shovels, pry bars, and a chainsaw, and I would never want to do that again. That was a tremendous